Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for the Sunday Satsang with Raman Kendra Delhi. May I now request Narayananji to please start the puja, followed by Upadesh Saram. Narayananji.
Yes, sir. Om Achyudaya Namaha, Om Anandaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha. Shuklam Bharadram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavatram Dhyaye Sarva Vighnopashante Ayamurta Samusa Dosmin Bhunto Mando Pranando Ayamurta Samusa Dostu Tadeva Raganam Sadinam Tadeva Taravaram Sadravanam Tadeva Vidyavaram Devavaram Tadeva Lakshmi Padete Tegriyum Smrami Om Go Om Bhuva Om Suva Om Maha Om Jana Om Tava Om Satyam Om Tatsavadharvavanyam Vargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodaya Om Abhajutra Amritam Purmavasvaram Pamopata Samasta Durga Shatwara Sri Parameswar Chittam Karshyamalasya Karmanaha Nirvekrena Prasamya Tattam Adau Vignesha Pudam Karshye Prithviya Nirutulasi Sudram Chandavarmo Devada Prithvi Diya Duda Doga Devatam Vishnunath Duda Twamsa Devi Bhaktram Gurudasanam Agamartam tu Devanam Kamnartam tu Rakshasam Kandharavam Karam Yadav Devavanalajanam Mopata Samasta Durga Shatwara Parmeswar Chittam Nirvudasya Chattamadav Vignesha Pudam Karshye Ganarantva Ganapati Gum Havamahe Kavi Kavinamo Satravam Destarajam Brahmana Brahmanaspade Alusunu Nurvisi Sadhanam Asmin Daritra Bhime Mahaganapati Dhyayami Mahaganapati Avamayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Asanam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Argyam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Padyam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Asmadiyam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Avasari Katnanam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Sanandaram Asmadiyam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Vastradatam Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Yagno Vabidartam Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Gandha Dharayami Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Gandhovari Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Alakarnatam Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Ritra Kungumam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Pushpai Bhujayami Om Sumudaya Namah Om Ekadantaya Namah Om Kapilaya Namah Om Gajagarnagaya Namah Om Lambodharaya Namah Om Vigadaya Namah Om Vigdharajaya Namah Om Vinayagaya Namah Om Dhumagedve Namah Om Kanatakshaya Namah Om Balachandraya Namah Om Gajarnaya Namah Om Bakrundaya Namah Om Surpakarnaya Namah Om Herambaya Namah Om Skandamurdvaya Namah Om Siddha Vinayagare Namah Om Shankara Moksha Vinayagare Namah Om Atupura Vinayagare Namah Om Mahaganapatiye Namah Nana Vida Parmana Patra Pushpani Samarpayami Dupatam Samarpayami Dupatam Samarpayami Aksharam Samarpayami ओम भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवसवित प्रसूत सत्यं दोर्जेन प्रसंजामि यं सोम स्वाहा। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा, ओम अपानाय स्वाहा, ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा, ओम उदानाय स्वाहा, ओम समानाय स्वाहा, ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः, महागणपतिये नमः, महागणपतिये नमः। प्रकंडने निवेद्यं समर्पयामि, मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि, अमृतोत्तरं समर्पयामि, कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। गणानां कविकवीनां ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पते आदित्यं महागणपतिये नमः, महागणपतिये नमः, महागणपतिये नमः। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि, नीराजनं समर्पयामि, नीराजनानन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम हरिओम हरिओम। महागणपतिये नमः, महागणपतिये नमः, महागणपतिये नमः। वक्रतुंड महाकाय कोटिसूर्य समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं सरसा प्रणमामि। ओम भू ओम भुव ओम स्व ओम मह ओम जन ओम तम ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। ओम ज्योतिषं समस्त दुर्ग क्षेत्र परमेश्वर कीर्तन सुबह सोमने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण नित्य प्रार्थे श्रीवेदे वराह कल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वंतरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मीनो दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सदाब्दे अस्मिन् वर्तमाने यावाविद्ये प्रवादीनां द्वादशी संवत्सराणां मध्ये पिलवनाम संवत्सरे उत्तरायणे शशिर ऋतु कुंभमासे कृष्णपक्षे द्वादशी तिथ्यां शुभतिथौ भानुवासर युक्तायां उत्तर पुष्टापदा नक्षत्र युक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ कर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायां अस्यां द्वादशी तिथ्यां शुभतिथौ मम जन्म प्रकृति एतच्चन पर्यन्तं मध्ये सर्वाचरणं सर्वेषां पावनं सत्य अनुनाथम् अस्माहं सहकुर्माणं क्षेम सद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्तमङ्गलाभ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्गोपशाभ्यर्थं रमणमहर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमणमहर्षि पूजां करिष्ये तदंगं कलश पूजां च करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। सोमनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च कलशस्य मुखे विष्णु कंठे रुद्र समादित्य मूले तत्र सिद्धो ब्रह्मा मातुमने संप्रदा कुशलतु सागरा सर्वे शब्द सुगा सुंदरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो पदर्वण गंगे सत्यं संगमे गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी यस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु अन्ते त्रेता सर्वे कर्तां समादित्य आयात देव पूजातं दुर्दश कारका। अंबुरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णुना विष्णुधरे देवस्य पूजिते पार्थिमर्जनि पार्जन्य नमोस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रोक्त जीव देव स्नानन अंजन निर्मालयं स्वयं भवने पूजये। ओम सकलगुणात्म शक्तियुक्ताय योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिगुरुमाय नमः अनंताय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दश दिक्पालेभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम अस्य प्राणविष्टामतस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषि चिकित्सामधर्मण संतांति सकल जगत सुसुरी संहारकारिणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिम शक्ति रोम तिलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिंगर्जनीभ्यां नमः ओम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आमनाभ्यां नमः हरिंगर्ष्टिकाभ्यां नमः ओम कर्णपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा ओम सिद्धाय वचन आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वचन ओम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्वस्तर दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तांबोधिस्त बोधोदस तरणधरणकराक्षे वासं बोधनं विक्षुप्त मणिगुण पंचबाणा विप्राण सुखवालं चिन्ह निसताप्ति नवसो रोटिया देवी बाला गौरना बहुसुधि प्राण शक्तिपरान ओम हरिं क्रोम हरिं मां अम्यं रक्तम वंशं शब्द अंश सोहम सोहम अंश अस्यामूर्तौ देवदृष्टुदु अस्यामूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस सस्य श्रोत्र दिव्या प्राणवान् पाणिपाद आयुस्तानि याक अस्ति स्वस्ति सुगम सुरम दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा ओम अस्य श्री प्राणनिष्ठा बंधस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषि ऋषि सामधर्माणि संतांसि सकल जगत सृष्टि सम्मार्गाणि प्राण शक्ति परा देवता आम बीजम हरि शक्ति रोम किलगम प्राण निष्ठा वियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिदर्शिभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आमनादिभ्यां नमः हरिवंशिकाभ्यां नमः रोम कर्णपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा रोम शिखाय वचन आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वचन रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्वस्तर दिग्बंध असुनीदे पुनरस्माक्ष सक्ष पुनः प्राणविहीनो दैवोगम जोगपस्य में सूर्य मुचन्न मुने मयान सुति आवायदो व सद्दाविदो व सन्निधो व सन्निधो व अवगुणिदो व सुब्रतो व सुब्रसन्नो व सुभगो व वर्णो व प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामी सर्व जगन्नाथ यावत् पूजा अवसानकम तावत् ध्रुव प्रतिभावेन बिंबेस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः चतुर्नो निबंधन जन पौल सुपत्रपा लक्ष्मी प्रदसी मानवग श्री ईश्वरा और recite भगवान नमोस्तुते श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वर गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः अपार भक्ति सुवारि राशौर्य शौर्य मात्रम भुवनं समस्तं गुणाइदं तं ब्रह्मं गभीरं चित्ताविनीनं हृदि चिन्तयामि ओम महोसेन जाताय नमः ओम श्री रमणाय नमः ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः ओम मौजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगत हितावताराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनादास्त लोचिताय नमः ओम पराशर कुलोत्तंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरातरवत्पलाय नमः ओम कमलीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम सयाय अम्बा सयायवते नमः ओम सोनाकुल महोदीन मानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशान्तमास्त्रे रक्त विद्योदयाय नमः ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रभुताय नमः ओम परमात्मविदे नमः ओम दिव्यराय नमः ओम पितृदानवेशिने नमः ओम इंदु मोहिना पितृपदे नमः ओम पितृराध्यस्थ सोणशैल प्राप्ताय नमः ओम तमोमयाय नमः ओम उदासीनाय नमः ओम महायोगिने नमः ओम माहुसाय नमः ओम कुशाग्रतिये नमः ओम शांत संकल्प संप्रभाय नमः ओम सुदुद्रुसे नमः ओम सवित्रे नमः ओम स्थिराय नमः ओम तमसमीर सर्वदाय नमः ओम बुल्लामुज विरोधनाय नमः ओम चंद्रिका सुदास श्रीमंदिराम मंडलाय नमः ओम सुदवाक्यम समासीनाय नमः ओम सूर्यलाक्ष विप्रमाय नमः ओम वेद वेदांत तत्पत्नाय नमः ओम चिन्मुक्तिने नमः ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः ओम विराजित सदाकृतिये नमः ओम उच्चित्तनयनाय नमः ओम पूर्णाय नमः ओम रसिदासनतांडवाय नमः ओम गंभीराय नमः ओम परमाचार्याय नमः ओम सुप्रसन्याय नमः ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः ओम दक्षिणासीनिवाय नमः ओम धीराय नमः ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः ओम स्वराजे नमः ओम महर्षिये नमः ओम भगवते नमः ओम ईक्याय नमः ओम भूम विद्या विशारदाय नमः ओम विमलाय नमः ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः ओम आप्ताय नमः ओम रुजमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः ओम समत्रुसे नमः ओम सत्यतुसे नमः, ओम सत्याय नमः, ओम प्रसादाय नमः, ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः, ओम सुकुमाराय नमः, ओम सदानंदाय नमः, ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः, ओम दयान्वय नमः, ओम श्री सोनातुल इरुद्भूत स्कंदासन निवेदनाय नमः, ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टरे नमः, ओम सद्भक्त वृत्त परिकृताय नमः, ओम गणेश मुनि प्रिय सेविता कुशलोरुवाय नमः, ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ संकीर्ण संशयाय नमः, ओम वर्णासन मदाधीदाय नमः, ओम रसज्ञाय नमः, ओम संभव्याय नमः, ओम आत्मवदे नमः, ओम सर्वावनि मदस्थान आराध्याय नमः, ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः, ओम आत्मा रामाय नमः, ओम महाभागाय नमः, ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः, ओम विरदाय नमः, ओम विरुदाय नमः, ओम विप्राय नमः, ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः, ओम भागवतोद्भवाय नमः, ओम दर्शनावक सम्माने नमः, ओम मौनेन स्वप्न बोधकाय नमः, ओम विचार निकर्षानित्याय नमः, ओम प्रणामबंध मोचकाय नमः, ओम अंतस्त्रिय चंडांशवे नमः, ओम संसारावतारकाय नमः, ओम सोनादिष्टवे नमः, ओम आत्मविद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः, ओम अविच्युत निज प्रज्ञाय नमः, ओम नैसर्गिक महातमसे नमः, ओम कमंडलुधराय नमः, ओम सुप्रगवीर वसनाय नमः, ओम भुवाय नमः, ओम दंडपाणिये नमः, ओम कृपा पूर्णाय नमः, ओम पवलोक पिशक्पराय नमः, ओम स्कंदाय नमः, ओम देवदमाय नमः, ओम अमर्त्याय नमः, ओम सेनानिये नमः, ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री कार्तिकाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री मुरुगाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री वल्ली देवाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री सुब्रमण्याय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री स्वामीनाथाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री नटराजने नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री भैरवे नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री शिव पार्वतीये नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम नमः शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः, ओम शिवाय नमः। उपदेश सारः कर्तुराज्ञया प्रापदे फलम् कर्म गिम्बरम् कर्म तज्जडम् प्रहृति महददो वदन कारणम् फलमशाश्वतम् गद निरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितम् नेचया कृतम् सिद्धसोदकम् मुक्तिसाधकम् कायवामन कार्यमुद्दमम् पूजनं जव चिन्तनं क्रमा जगतैसरी युक्तसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवपूजनम् उद्दमस्तवा दुर्जमन्दद सिद्धजं जव ज्ञानमुद्दमम् आद्यधारया श्रोरसासनम् सरलचिन्तनम् विरलदबरम् वेदभावना सौममित्यसौ भावना विना भावनीमगा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावना बला भक्तिरुत्तमा इरुष्टरे मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्ति योग बोधाच निश्चितम् वायुरोधना लीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोध साधनम् सिद्धवायव सिद्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्वै शक्तिमूलका लय विनाशने उभयरोधने लयकदम्बुन भवदिनो मृदम् प्राणवन्दना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नासमेत्यद नष्टमानसो दृष्टयोगिन नित्यमस्ति स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारिदं सिद्धमात्मन सिद्वदर्शनं तत्वदर्शनं मानसं दुहिं मार्गणे हृदे नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अहमयं कुतो भवति चिनवद ऐपदत्यहं निज विसारणम् अहमिनासभात् यमहं दया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं पदा अभिख्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अत्यल्यसत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीदम नामसे कद गज्जडं स्वस सत्ववासिगा सित्ववेदरा सद्दयायिची सिद्धयायहम् ईसजीवयोर् वेषदीविदा सत्स्वभावतो वस्तु केवलम् वेशानग स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनित्वया आत्मनिष्ठदा ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनची ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमन्तरम् किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा अपूर्णसिद्धं बन्धमुक्त्यदि सम्बरं सुखं विन्ददीयैः वस्तुदैविक अहमवेदकं निजविमानकं महति तं तपो रमणवाक्यं महति तं तपो रमणवाक्यं महति तं तपो रमणवाक्यम्
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for the Sunday Satsang. In continuation of our Satsangs for 42 select verses from Bhagavad Gita, we will be studying the following two verses drawn from the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita called Dhyana Yoga. These two verses are quite important and form the key instructions given by Sri Krishna on how to meditate. Our speaker for these sessions will be Sri Raghav Kumarji, a long-time devotee of Bhagavan and a resident near the ashram in Tiruvannamalai. A brief background about him. Raghavji is a devotee of Bhagavan Sri Raman Maharishi with a background of Vedanta study under various acharyas of Rishikesh and Uttarkashi over several years. After completing a degree in technology in 1993 and a few years of research in electronics, he was drawn to the exclusive pursuit of the path of self-enquiry. He was blessed to be closely associated with the Ramakrishna mission, Arshavidya tradition, and the Adi Shankara Brahma Vidya Peeth, Uttarkashi. Since 2001, he divides his time between Uttarkashi and Tiruvannamalai. He occasionally shares what he has learned from the acharyas with fellow devotees. Raghavji.
Namaste and welcome to our study of Bhagavan's selected 42 verses from the Bhagavad Gita. We will start with the Shanti mantras as we always have been doing. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। वन्दे श्रीरमणश्रेः आचार्यस्य पदाब्जं यो मे दर्शयतीशं भान्तं धान्तमतीत्य। पार्थसारथिरूपेण श्रावयित्वा शुभाङ्गिरम् पार्थस्यार्तिहरो देवः कृपामूर्तिः स पातु नः। So we were studying the key verses from Bhagavan's selected 42 verses, which deal with the nitty-gritty of how we deal with the obstacles to Atma Vichara, self-inquiry, and also how the various emotions that are present in us that prevent us from owning up our true nature can be dealt with. We are not helpless with respect to our emotions. That is the message, the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavan, that we can get a handle over our inner situation. We are not helpless. We can do something about it. That is the message. And the nitty-gritty, the exact approach and understanding that needs to be internalized was explained in these verses, from verses 23 to 28. The last two verses in this set, namely verses 27 and 28, deal with the crux of the whole self-inquiry method, which Bhagavan taught and which is identical to what Sri Krishna Bhagavan has explained in the Bhagavad Gita. You know, sometimes there is a certain scope to say that was a traditional method different from what Sri Bhagavan taught? But these two verses especially, which we are going to be looking at perhaps a little today and a little again in the next
I think there is some internet issue, Raghavji.
okay.
The internet connection at your end is showing problem. It's showing deep red. Now it is yellow.
Is it better now?
Now it is perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Yes. So this tranche of shlokas, this group of shlokas is very important for, devotees of Bhagavan specifically, because, like I said, it establishes the equivalence, the exact identity of the method of self-inquiry taught by Bhagavan and what Dhyana Yoga explains, or Sri Krishna Bhagavan has explained in Dhyana Yoga to Arjuna. And I thought I'd also just devote a few minutes to express our respect and our pranams on this beautiful upcoming occasion of Mahashivaratri before we resume this study of these shlokas. It's a huge relief to all us devotees that, after the challenging situation that the world has faced over the last 2 years, Bhagavan has created his own way of humanity developing their resistance, perhaps, their immune response being so better, and the pandemic has at least come to a slightly better situation. I could definitely venture that. And so many of the temples and ashrams are going to heartily, organize Mahashivaratri. And I pray that this is for the welfare of all devotees. As many of you would be aware, this day called the Mahashivaratri was the day that Bhagavan Shiva was worshipped by Vishnu and Brahma. This story is of course popular, but I will just refer to it in brief, and we will also see how it is significant in terms of our own sadhana life. As the story goes, that Brahma and Vishnu competed to assert who was more great, who was supreme, and Bhagavan Shiva manifested initially as this mysterious column of infinite light, ever expanding, ever growing, and very dynamic. This made Brahma and Vishnu necessarily confront that issue of what or who was this luminous column of light, who was this being who was constantly expanding and growing in luminosity, in glory. And so, as the story goes, Vishnu Bhagavan became or assumed the form of a boar and tried to get to the origin of this luminous column or pillar of light. And Brahma tried to reach the summit, and being unable to do so, he told a lie that he had reached the summit and summoned up this flower to establish that he had attained success. Vishnu was more humble, more vulnerable in admitting his inability to reach the origin of the linga. And so they say that Shiva then manifested and blessed them by first chastising Brahma and blessing Vishnu. And finally, that column of light condensed into this hill, Parvatakaram Gataha, as the Arunachala Purana says, that Shiva assumed this form of a hill condensed into the hill called Arunachala. Sri Bhagavan himself refers to this story on a couple of occasions, and he explains that initially the formless Brahman becomes unknowable if it remains just formless. And so for bestowing grace on the devotees, that formless Brahman assumed a form which is the linga. In our case, that linga is not different or the same as Arunachala. So Bhagavan in one conversation mentions this, which I'd like to mention this to you, that Shiva has both a transcendent form, which is as Nirguna Brahman, formless consciousness. And that same Shiva, Bhagavan says, for the sake of devotees, so that we can relate to that formless reality, becomes this linga. So both the transcendent, as they call it, which is the Nirguna aspect, and the immanent. Immanent means that which is all pervading, but at least it is relatable through various forms. So the immanent aspect of Shiva is also revealed to us through the linga. That is the correlation between Brahman as formless and linga, which is a form. Only through the linga we are able to relate to the infinite. Otherwise, how do we relate to the infinite? What action would constitute a prayer or any way of adoring that infinite reality? So some form, some limited embodiment as though is required. And Shiva was therefore gracious to manifest as this linga, because in this particular story, Brahma and Vishnu were deluded by their ahankara, by their assertion of their supremacy, and Shiva bestowed his grace on them through that manifestation. The interesting part of this story is how the person who was more vulnerable gets the grace. So once we have that attitude that, okay, I know something, but I'm also not clear about certain things. I have some vulnerability when it comes to the vyavahara. That vulnerability alone bestows the grace. The moment we take a stand, oh yes, I have read so much, I know so much, and there's nothing much more that I really need to know. Oh, I have my guru, and my guru is everything. So even that is a subtle form of ahankara. That very Guru, we have to be open to his grace. And that grace, like we saw in the story of Brahma and Vishnu, that grace of the Guru can come only if there is some vulnerability. That is, we maintain an attitude that, yes, we have this conviction in the Upadesha of the Guru, but there is scope for improvement in how I embody it in my life, how I embody it in my behavior. So that vulnerability alone makes us more and more move towards Ishvara, have that nishtha, have that firm abidance in the self. Without that vulnerability, we prematurely become, triumphant. Oh yes, all that is to be done is already done. So there's a premature triumphalism, as they put it, which sets in unless that vulnerability is there. So Vishnu embodies that vulnerability of the devotee, that yes, I have some degree of shraddha, some degree of conviction in the teaching of Advaita, and yet I need to be more clear in embodying that in my life, in my mind, in my emotions. So that alone brings the grace of Ishvara through that vulnerability. Then again, this Shivaratri is especially sacred because there is a circadian rhythm, like a cosmic rhythm, which flows through the seasons of the year. And our ancient rishis found that this particular onset of spring corresponding to March, when the sun is in the constellation Magha, in Tamil they call it Masi, in Sanskrit, the Magha Masa. It's a nakshatra called Magha. And in this particular, time of the year, there is some upsurge of energy. There's an upsurge of energy implies that it is a very delicate situation where it's much easier in some sense to practice certain kinds of meditations and sadhanas and get some breakthroughs in one's life. Okay? We can get some really significant breakthroughs in one's life in terms of one's understanding, in terms of one's behavior patterns. So there is some change possible, a little more easy during this period. And yet this upsurge of energy can also create some distress or some restlessness if we are unawareful, which is why certain of these times are mentioned by our ancient Mahatmas and Rishis, such as the Shivaratris of the year. There are 12 of them. Every month, the Chaturdashi, the 14th day of the fortnight, of the dark fortnight, is the Masa Shivaratri. So we are heading towards the Amavasya, which is the new moon. So one day prior to that is known as the Masa Shivaratri. There is a certain special energy there every 14th day of the dark fortnight, 12 of them in a year. And this particular Shivaratri in the Magha Masa is known as the Maha Shivaratri. Okay, so of the 12 Shivaratris, one is known as the Maha Shivaratri, implying that that's when this availability of inner spiritual energy, if you like, is maximally there. So all these words I'm using are what our Mahatmas have said. It's not something that so far at least nobody has actually started doing so much of research and trying to prove it empirically, but in a subtle way we can experience this upsurge or this benefit from this Shivaratri time by just following this practice, which in this case is to remain awake all through the night. The Jagaran is, as you know, the critical part. I'm reminded of one very interesting anecdote of Swami Brahmananda, who was a direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, Raghav Maharaj, as he is known in Bengali. So he used to say that in many Shiva Kshetras, particularly Varanasi, the midnight time is especially powerful for relating to Shiva. And whereas in Vrindavan, where the energy of Vishnu or Krishna is more palpable, he used to say that the Brahma Muhurta, the 4 a.m. time is more suitable for meditation. So this is a subtle but very palpable shift or changes in the diurnal energy pattern. So it's in a way we can say that it's much easier to practice whatever you're practicing, Atma Vichara, Japa, Mantra, chanting, If we do it in consonance with that rhythm, we can go deeper. And so we tap into that natural biorhythm of circadian rhythm. And by staying awake during this particular midnight, the Nishita Kala, as it is called, when the Lingodbhava happens, the midnight time of the Mahashivaratri is when the Linga was worshipped. It's actually the Lingodbhava, the Linga manifested. And the Shivaratri is the day when the worship of Shiva happened. Okay, so these two significant times are there for all devotees of Shiva. The very manifestation of that primal linga happened during the Ardra Masa, which was in January, and the actual worship of that linga happened on Shivaratri, the first time in history, or after creation. And so this Shivaratri, the Nishita Kala, the midnight time of the Shivaratri, is especially sacred to Shiva. And in modern times, I found some validation for this very clearly from Swami Brahmanandaji's experiences. He says in Varanasi, it's very, very powerful to meditate at midnight. And I've heard this from other devotees as well, independently. They say that Varanasi especially has this, quality towards the midnight. So it's believable to say and credible to say that the Nishita Kala has this special characteristic, particularly on the Mahashivaratri day. Last but not the least is how even at a drishta level, even at a visible level, leave alone the adrishta, that is the invisible, benefits which I mentioned so far, even at a drishta level, resisting the urge to sleep is a very powerful, assertion of your free will. And you're trying to assert and empower yourself, saying, I shall not just, give in to these natural kind, so-called natural, urges and the demands of the body. Just for once, I will try to gently resist it. You have a very enabling environment, other devotees doing pujas, and therefore you use that opportunity all the more to try and resist that very powerful urge to sleep, the demand of the body for sleep. Try and remain awake as much as you can. And it is said in one of the Puranas that the idea is to keep the head, neck, and trunk in a straight line, meaning you don't lie down. Okay? No doubt the head may still nod a little. That's still okay. But just try and, as per the Purana, keep the head, neck, and trunk in a straight line, it says, indicating that you remain a little alert. So this way of remaining alert without allowing sleep to overpower you, it is said, has some very powerful effect on the entire, mind and body mechanism. In fact, the Purana goes on, just to shift back again into the Adrishta aspect, it says that any, lacunae in your other practices throughout the year which you've done are kind of compensated if you were to do some mantra repetition and participate in the puja on this particular night, all night long. So the dharma, way they put it is that just as, different waves come and hit the shore and then they go back, right? But some waves are larger and some waves are shorter. But then when the flood tide of the full moon comes, the full moon rises, there's a tide, the whole ocean comes forth. It completely covers the beach. And even so, it is said that even if your little sadhanas or whatever small practices throughout the year have some ebb and flow like the little waves, during Shivaratri, the whole energy is like the tide of the sea. It comes forth and covers all the other lacunae, all the other karmas. Such an example is given. So in other words, it's very desirable to at least stay awake to a certain extent, whatever extent is feasible. It's desirable to urge that resist that natural demand to sleep. So Mahashivaratri is something we all cherish and we all prize over so many other sadhanas because of these reasons. I'm also reminded of one particular story that's told about the Mahashivaratri, which to me is a very evocative story, which it says that when the Samudra Madhana, the churning of the ocean took place, and the Devas and the Danavas the demons and the gods cooperated and churned the milk ocean. This churning metaphorically represents that churning in each sadhaka's mind. When you do sadhana, definitely some churning happens and some things come out, both welcome as well as unwelcome processes are observed and things come out. So even so, when this churning happened and the first thing that came out was the hala, poison. And Shiva graciously, took that poison into him and held it in his throat. And the story goes that the condition for the poison not to affect Shiva was that he had to not sleep for a certain length of time. And so it is said that all the devas got together to help or to just, give company to the Lord. It's a story, okay? The Lord is all powerful, but nevertheless, the devas, it is said, were always, engaged in worship of the Lord and singing the praises of the Lord and chanting and doing the kirtan, dancing. And they kept the Lord, engaged both for their own edification as well as symbolically to keep the Lord awake, it is said, so that the poison would not affect at all the manifestation of the Lord. So this is the story. I take it in this way that how Bhagavan too would say that when sadhana is done, the first thing is whatever is inside tends to come out. So the churning of the ocean is any kind of sadhana, any kind of practice will first bring out a certain, a restlessness sometimes, or a certain amount of distress also comes out. Why? Because when we are unawareful, we never notice those things. We are distracting ourselves in so many different ways. And when we start actually boldly looking into the reality of our own mind and emotions, yes, they come to light. Not that they weren't there earlier. It's just that we were not observing the inner reality of fear, of some sadness perhaps. But Krishna and our Bhagavan, all of them assure us that this churning is healthy. It's something that we need to do, if not now, later, and sooner the better. And so the Samudra Mathana, which brings out the hala, represents all that is distressing, that was kept repressed or suppressed, either way, starts to come out and it releases us. It lets go of us. It's not like it will go on harassing us. So things come out and then they leave us. All we have to do is remain rooted in our sadhana, remain rooted in Shraddha, and what is trying to go out goes out. It's not as if these distressing, emotions or the outcome of the churning process of sadhana will go on haunting us for long. Not so. All we do is Sakashayam Vijaniyat, as the very beautiful idea in the Mandukya Upanishad says, Sakashayam Vijaniyat. Whenever this kashaya, these impurities come out, like the poison when the Samudra Mathana happened, Vijaniyat, be awareful. Just know them to be something that are coming and going. They are not you. They do not really touch you. You are unaffected, truly speaking, by this kashaya or these impurities which come to the surface. The impurities can be in the form typically of thoughts and emotions. So none of that is your true nature. And the injunction or the practice there is vijaniya. Just be awareful and stay rooted in your practice, be it atma vichara or be it japa. Sakashayam vijaniyat samapraptam nachalaye, says the Advaita Prakarana of Mandukya Upanishad. So here the Samudra Mathana, as I said, therefore you can master or not get overwhelmed by this distressing emotions or any such thoughts and any such disturbances that come out by being very awareful. So the night vigil, keeping vigil as it's called in English, staying awake is like being very awareful. We continue to be awareful, notice what is the truth of our mind, but do not get carried away by it. So it's in a way very simple and at the same time very challenging. Stay rooted as you are. You are being asked to do nothing. It's such a simple yet powerful practice that you don't have to do anything when the mind's churning happens. If at all, we can say that we don't do things that affect others around us adversely. So we just say, okay, my mind is going through this churning. This is like their Samudra Mathana. I stay rooted in whatever practice, Atma Vichara, as Bhagavan Krishna and Sri Ramana Maharshi, our Guru, have taught, or it be it Japa. Just stay with the practice, recognize this is Kashayam, recognize this is something that comes and goes, and stay rooted in your practice. By that very staying rooted, by just allowing our behavior and responses and our distress not to affect the others around. So we don't vent it out on others. We don't, adversely hurt or harm anyone around in any way due to this churning within us. That's the only responsibility we are asked to have. And then Ishvara will take care of the rest. It's like a natural process of how, your body might reject a thorn out of its, body. If there's a thorn piercing you, I once had this interesting experience that the thorn had gone into the hand or the palm, and I kind of thought I had removed the thorn, and the skin had formed over it. So I thought it's nothing left, and yet there was a small speck on my palm. It stayed for like 3 weeks or something, and there was a light pain. Now the interesting thing was, after 3 weeks, the skin that had formed over it slowly started, giving way, bursting. And the thorn, over a period of 5 to 6 days, spontaneously, as it were, came out and left the palm. It just came out, the skin burst. There was a small wound, no doubt, but the thorn came out of its own. So I kind of felt, I was amazed by the intelligence of the body, how it initially covered up the thorn. Perhaps if it was something very small, the body might have just, maybe dissolved it or something. But this was too big. And so the body figures out its own way of rejecting what doesn't belong to it. Even so, this kashaya, this halahala, this poison, or any kind of inner distress is something that is alien to your true nature. You are of the very nature of ananda, and the mind has, the buddhi has its own intelligence. It will expel that which is contrary to its true nature. You have to give it time. You have to just give it that little space. Your sadhana is that opportunity that you're giving to yourself to heal yourself, to manifest your Ananda Swarupa. All sadhana is ultimately just coming back to yourself by creating that little space so that your body and mind can heal themselves and come back to being rooted in your Swarupa. That Swarupa Nishtha can emerge. So that's how the body and mind are just allowed to heal. There is no, worry about what comes out of this churning. And the Mahashivaratri occasion, when Shiva is said to have swallowed the poison and awarefully handled it, is our inspiration for this kind of sadhana. So with this, we will resume the shlokas which we are looking at. It's interestingly tied in with what we were discussing about the obstacles to sadhana and how the nitty-gritty can be dealt with. The nitty-gritty refer to, okay, finally, all this we can argue like this. All this sounds theoretical, or certain amount of, ideas are given. So what does it boil down to when it comes to what I should do? Well, that's what these two shlokas, which we will try to discuss both today and in subsequent sessions, deal with. Like I said, remember, if there are any two shlokas in the Bhagavad Gita which establish the identity of Bhagavan's teaching with Bhagavad Gita, are these two shlokas. Okay, they are from the 6th chapter called the Dhyana Yoga. I had mentioned this before, how Krishna gives so many instructions, over 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita. But when it comes to the key shlokas dealing with dhyana, there are very few of them. And these two shlokas, which we are now going to look at, represent that very core of that teaching. Okay? The exact core of what it means to meditate. What is meditation? This popular word today. In the vision of the Gita, what is the key practice of meditation? What does it constitute is mentioned in these two shlokas. We will first chant them and then we will study. So the first shloka, which is the 27th shloka of the 42 selected verses from the Bhagavad Gita, we have chanted. Shanai Shanai Ruparame Buddhya Dhriti Grihitaya Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Na Kinchidapi Chintayet Shanai Shanairuparame Buddhya Dhriti Grihitaya Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Nakinchidapi Chintayet. So this shloka, the 25th, if I'm not mistaken, of the Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter. Yeah, it's the 25th in the 6th chapter. It says that gradually, not by a use of a lot of force, but gradually draw in the mind gently. Shanai Shanaihi. Uparamed. May the mind gently resolve. Uparamed. Buddhya. By the use of your buddhi, by your resoluteness. Dhriti grihitaya. Dhriti means firmness. It also means courage, like dhairyam. So dhriti grihitaya, with a lot of courage and firmness, with such an attitude, with such a buddhi, gently draw in the mind, shanai shanai ruparame, atma samstham manah kritva. So that second line is the key, words, and the word atma samstham manah kritva means center the mind, allow the mind to abide as the self. It's identical to what Bhagavan says, be as you are, abide as the self. Atma samstham manaha kritva na kinchidapi chintayet. One need not at that point think of anything in particular. Let the mind gently resolve as the self, and no further ideation is required. This is the literal or the first level, literal translation of, so to speak, of that shloka. The use of the double adverb is something very specific to Indian languages. I'm often fond of noticing that. In English, we sometimes, mistakenly translate or use that. So like we might say even in Indian English, the bus is coming slowly, slowly, or he is going slowly, slowly. So like dhire dhire chalta hai. So this usage is not there in English. We never can really accurately say he is going slowly, slowly. But in Hindi, it's perfectly fine. Dhire dhire chalega. Dhire dhire ho jayega. Even in Sanskrit, it's there. Shanai shanai. Slowly, slowly. It's the double use of the adverb there. Even in Tamil and even in other Indian languages, it is there. In Telugu, we'd say melli melliga. Slowly, slowly. The use of the adverb twice. It indicates a certain gradualness, a certain continuity of that adverb, which Indian languages and Sanskrit also have this particular peculiar usage. And we Indians sometimes translate it literally into English and say, he's going slowly, slowly, which actually is funny, but it's also understandable. So shanai shanai, gradually, not hatat, not in an abrupt way. So the idea here is that if we try to do something very abruptly, in the sense of trying to just forcing the mind, just stop all the thoughts, it's not going to work. Instead, there's a gradual process there. We'll look into what that gradual process is. So gradually draw in the mind. Shanai shanai ruparame. Buddhya. So here the key word is the buddhi. If you remember, we saw how our own mind has this dual structure. Okay, broadly speaking, a dual structure, two layers to our mind, if you like. The first is manas, the more outer, more expressed part of the mind. Then the deeper convictions, deeper beliefs, deeper assumptions about ourselves, about others around us, about the world. All that is buddhi. Okay, that which is concluding about things, that which is reaching conclusions about things. Nischayatmika buddhi. And that very buddhi, when it is in touch with the mind of the Guru, is in touch with the buddhi of the Guru rather, it becomes a great instrument for sadhana, a great instrument for destroying the avidya. So we are trying to make our buddhi resonate with the buddhi of our Guru, of Bhagavan here. That is sufficient to have this dhriti grihitaya. We become very firm and resolute. So what does it mean to say that our buddhi is connected to the buddhi of Bhagavan. It means that whenever there is any thought or any idea that our own mind kind of feels is maybe true, but it is not in line with what our Guru has instructed us, then we choose to go with what our Guru has instructed us rather than other whims of our own mind. I gave you the example earlier. Do you remember? That supposing I have a watch and I go to India's most accurate, clock, an atomic clock kept somewhere in ISI, and not the Pakistan ISI, but the Indian Standards Institute, which maintains the Indian Standard Time. And they'll have this atomic clock, which maintains the Indian Standard Time to picosecond accuracy. And so I take my watch there. I'm not going to say, hey, my watch is right. The atomic clock maintained by your institute is wrong. I'll never say that. Okay? I know that even if there's a difference between my watch and the standard clock maintained by India's premier institution, which maintains this accurate atomic clock, I will correct my watch. Okay? Even though I trust my watch in many ways, still I correct my watch in the light of the atomic clock before me. Even so, even if my experience seems to go against what the Guru says, I choose to question my experience. I do not question that the Guru may be wrong. So when the Guru says, hey, you are Brahman, you are free from all this mess that you seem to be in, stay rooted, summa iru, just stay rooted with the truth of that. Do japa. If you feel staying rooted, abiding just as you are, being in nididhyasana is too tough for you, okay, that's not an issue. Stay with japa, stay with mantra repetition. And when that Guru's words to us feel, no, the Guru's words may be okay, but, there's a but I still have this to deal with, I have to deal with that, I have to do this, I have to do that. The mind goes on creating these narratives for itself. Then I choose not to go along with those narratives. I say, let the mind have its narratives. I refuse to go along with it and believe what the mind is telling me about myself or about the world. Instead, I choose to say, my Guru is right, the Advaita tradition is correct. See, Guru here is not, remember, just some personality cult. It refers to the entire Advaita tradition, which is coming to you in the form of the Guru. It's like the scientific tradition, which is coming to you in the form of your teacher in college or in a university. So even so, our Guru is what we understand as the Advaita tradition. This impersonal tradition is coming to us in front of us, in flesh and blood as our beloved Guru. So that is the attitude. And so we adjust our understanding to resonate with what the Guru is telling us. We just don't go along with our minds, whims, and fancies. That's very difficult, but it's also very powerful. That I refuse to believe what my mind is telling me about myself when it contradicts the teaching of Advaita, which is given to me by my Guru. So this practice is what is here known as Buddhya Dhriti Grihitaya. You rest in the Buddhi, go along with the Buddhi, which is firmly connected with the heart of the Guru. Dhriti Grihitaya. Dhriti means with resoluteness. When we actually start churning, start looking within, like I just mentioned, whatever distress comes up, sometimes it can sweep us off our feet, make us feel, lower sometimes than where we were earlier. That's where we need this dhriti. Dhriti means also courage. We need a lot of courage to look within. We need a lot of courage to just face the reality of what is. It's not as if we are trying to, create any problems. Just looking at what is, looking at my situation in life, my contents of my mind. And I refuse to go along with that. I refuse to give in to fear. I refuse to give in to insecurity. Because why do I refuse to give in? Because the Guru has told me, you are the locus of all freedom from fear. You are the locus of all that is secure. No matter what happens outwardly, you can stay rooted in yourself. In practical terms, it means your deepest happiness will not be affected unless you choose to get it affected. Unless you choose to say, I'm going to suffer if this does not happen, yes, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you take a stand, no matter what happens, I will stay with the Upadesha of Advaita, then your deepest peace and happiness cannot be shaken. There may be small waves which come and go. There may be some oscillations now and then, but you come back to being with that dhriti, with that firmness, with that buddhi. So that is what is talked of here. Buddhya dhriti grihitaya. You come back firmly, reconnect with the teaching of the Guru. And then what is the key word which embodies this entire practice of meditation here? Atma samstham manah kritva. So if that one word you are able to meditate, dwell upon it, it's going to be a great blessing, because that represents, like I said, the key teaching of both Gita as well as Bhagavan. In simple English, we can say, be as you are. In Tamil, we will say, summa iru. Bhagavan Krishna says, Atmasamtam mana kuru. Kuru means do. So be as just the self. And we will look into all, the depth of this method and the meaning of that. But just stay for now with this word, Atmasamstam manaha. That's the key word in the entire Gita, which embodies the meditation teaching of the Gita. Remember, the Gita has so much about karma yoga, the preparatory stages, about how we are in line with dharma, how we offer all our actions to Ishvara. All that is there. And then there's the dhyana aspect of the Bhagavad Gita teaching, which is embodied in this single word, really, Atmasamstam manaha kuru. And then na kinchidapi chintayet. Once that Atmasamstam manaha, abiding as the self, once you're able to, really relate to that, then na kinchidapi chintayet. You don't have to again increase your ideation. You don't have to bring in some ideas at that point. Just stay there, be there. And then we face the different challenges that come up and go. That's the next shloka, which tells us what next or what happens then, if at all. So incidentally, in those of us who are familiar with Bhagavan's teaching, we would know of what is known as Aham Spurana. So just to remind you or recapitulate that aspect of Bhagavan's teaching, what Bhagavan says, if you recollect, when the mind goes out, thinking of this thought or that thought, gently turn the mind back and inquire, who am I? What am I? So each time your mind goes out, bring the mind back and rest as the self. Okay, don't think of the self. It's not a thought about the self. It is abiding as the self. Bhagavan says, just turn the mind within and inquire, what am I? Who am I? And the consequence of that is this aham sphurana. That is, the mind resolves, and the spontaneous nature of consciousness arises. That consciousness is a priori. You are free from the limitations of the mind. That sphurana is what is the aham sphurana. That aham sphurana arises, says Bhagavan. And this atma samstam manaha is what is identical to that aham sphurana. Elsewhere in the Advaita Shastra, we sometimes use the word Brahmakara Vritti. All of them are referring to that very same, very special, blessing, really, where the mind is able to resolve into its source, into its origin. That is the Aham Sphurana or Atma Samstam Manaha, as it is mentioned here. The word Manaha is mind. So it literally means, may the mind be brought to reside or to be firmly established in the self. So it doesn't imply a kind of thinking about the self. So there's a subtle difference here. I can think about God with a form. I can think about a mantra. I can think about many, realities of this spiritual universe. But when it comes to Atma, you can only say, I am the self. You cannot think about the self. You cannot think of the self. Okay. So what can you do? The mind is made gently to let go of its preoccupations with anatma. Mind is habitually preoccupied with anatma. Anatma means that which is not the self. And in this practice, the mind is made to gently resolve as atma. in practical terms, what it would amount to is saying that even if just by staying with any practice for a length of time, let us say in one session, even a person sits quietly for 45 minutes, 1 hour perhaps, a little more, at some point the mind will quieten down. Okay, if he has at least some consistency in the practice, without doubt that blessing of the Guru will arise. Seeing the sincerity of that sadhaka, gurus will all definitely bless us. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that in the Kali Yuga, if a sadhaka at least weeps for God for 3 days, he will get the blessing of Ishvara. The idea is, if we are able to stay with something consistently, devote more time, just literally devote more time to this practice, the mind will at some point sink into its source. At least we get that glimpse of something which is a priori. Otherwise, we are always floating with the mind, going with the mind in its peregrinations, in its travels. And then we are able to find that grounding through this practice of So, nakinchidapi chintayet. This is the gist of the shloka, gist of Atma Vichara of Bhagavan, and gist of the Bhagavad Gita's Dhyana Yoga. So at this point, maybe we will stop for today, and any questions, if they are there, you can ask them. Otherwise, I'll refer in brief to one question last time, or any other things you can please ask. Yeah. Yes, Krishnamurti ji, Ramakrishna Krishnamurti ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, Pranam Raghav ji.
Yeah, can you be a little louder, please?
Yeah, Pranam Raghav ji.
Pranam.
Actually, last week there was a point raised by someone about infinite regression during the
infinite regression, correct.
During the I feeling. So, can you please elaborate on what exactly this is? What is the experience that one has of this infinite regression, and also how to overcome it?
Yes. Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So just first I'll dwell a little on the very question itself, which is just, which is that there is a kind of process or pitfall, if you like, called infinite regression, which happens in, this self-inquiry type of practices. All practices which can broadly be called self-inquiry. Why I say all practices? Because there are, different words to say the same thing, but they all are self-inquiry. So in self-inquiry, what happens is that sometimes we will say, okay, what am I? When we raise this question, as it were, or use that attitude to turn within, there is a further question. Okay, who is the person that is turning within? You can ask that question again. So I will repeat. Supposing you are practicing some thoughts start coming up. One option is I choose to go along with the thought, meaning I will look into the content of the thought. Suppose I get a thought of some visit to some, let us say, place I saw, Bombay or something. Then I will think, okay, I went to Bombay, then yeah, that thing happened in Bombay, or I met somebody in Bombay. Yes, he was like this. So, you go along with the thought, you get carried away, you get swept off. Then suddenly you wake up, or you kind of realize, oh dear, I've got carried away by the thought. Then you say, no, who is the thinker of the thought? I'm not interested in the content of the thought. Okay, step one is what? I refuse to take interest in the content of the thought. Instead, what am I? Who am I? I use these very words of what am I or who am I to turn or shift my attention back to the self. Okay, who am I, what am I is not so much another mantra we repeat, as many of you would know. Instead, it is an attitude, if you like, or it's an approach of shifting the attention from the content of the thought to the thinker. So that is the way we deal with the mind's oscillations. Now, the question was about this. If this happens, that is, I do shift my attention to what am I. Now, there's a further thought possible. Okay, who is the person that is shifting the attention to what am I? Okay, you can ask a further question. Instead of just shifting the attention, the question again arises, who is the person that is shifting this attention and, as it were, doing something there? This is a possible question. It's a possible question because there's a small pitfall or a small subtlety there. But first, let us state the question more clearly. So, therefore, initially was thoughts come, you get rid of or at least deal with those thoughts by asking this question or shifting your attention, who am I? Then that begs the question, who is it that is asking the question, who am I? Okay. Who is it that is asking the question, who am I? I can further ask that question. Then again, I can ask the question, who is asking the question, who is, what am I? One more level of abstraction is possible. In this manner, I could just go on in infinite regression, anavastha doshaha. In Sanskrit, we say anavastha doshaha. So I would go on saying, what am I? Then I can say, who is it asking, what am I? Then I'll further say, who is it that who's asking the question which I just stated? So in this way, one could go into some kind of an infinite loop. There is no resolution. It's a kind of trap, if you like. Isn't the trap there? The question was that. How do I address it if I get into that kind of a loop, as it were? Infinite loop there, as it were. And so the answer is that, the fact that I am not able to stop that first level shifting of attention is a sign, okay? It's a sign, it's an indication that the mind is simply resisting that question. So if the mind, hypothetically, let's the mind was a little malleable, let us assume for the moment. And the moment you, with that dhritigrihitaya, with that firm, resolute attitude, shift the attention from the content of the thought to the Atma, first through the thinker. I'm skipping some steps, but finally you rest the mind in the self. If the mind cooperates with that, see carefully, if the mind cooperates with this what am I or who am I process of shifting the attention to the thinker, then the mind resolves. The mind will necessarily resolve, because that I which is being referred to as who am I or what am I is a priori. It's even before the mind has arisen. So if I shift my attention to that, I become that. Okay? Unlike in the other cases of other objects, where I can shift my attention from object 1 to object 2 to object 3, I can go on shifting my attention like that, right? The mind continues its life or its narrative. But if I were to do this, who am I, shifting of attention, the mind will dissolve there. If it is done as it is to be done, it will dissolve, because that I is there even before the mind even arose. The mind, even before it verbalized, even before it asserted its smallness, that I is already there. A priori. A priori means even before. It is svatasiddhaha. The word we use in Shastra is svatasiddhaha. And therefore, really, the what am I, who am I method will make the mind not ask that further question. But sometimes the mind is so stubborn, it will resist resolving as the I. And it will go on doing this infinite regression thing. So it's a subtler game than, getting lost in the content of the thoughts. So many thoughts come, I can lose myself in them. Now here, the mind, without dissolving into its source, it goes into this another game, as it were. Go on presenting this question, what am I? Who is thinking this, what am I? Who is doing self-inquiry? So this way you go on, can get into a loop situation. Okay. So what do you do there? First of all, recognize that the thinker in any such ideation is assuming the mind is there. Meaning, any such thought which is in the form of regression also, just recognize that the mind is still there. It is forming an object and it is dwelling on the object. Just recognize that. In other words, when this regression happens, let us to somebody, this may not be a problem for everybody, but let us say somebody is faced with this challenge of regression. The first thing you recognize is that when this regression kind of a thing is happening in your what to inquire, self-inquiry, recognize that the mind is continuing to create an object for itself. The object may not be like a tree or a stone or not an external object. It is this concept, okay? It is this concept of I. It is this concept of self-inquiry. So now the mind is dwelling upon this object called self-inquiry. Earlier the mind was thinking about its visit to some Bombay or visit to some place or some person it is thinking of earlier, which was distracting the mind. Now the mind is forming a concept called self-inquiry, forming a concept called what am I inquiry, forming a concept called Bhagavan's teaching. So it is forming a concept there. It's subtle, but we keenly observe that there is still this ideation, okay, that I am there and this what am I inquiry is there, and I am doing this what am I inquiry. So there again you say, I am not the doer of the inquiry, what am I? So you again just stay as the self. So if you are able to recognize that triputi, even in this regression, there is a triputi. I am there and the object is there. In this case, it's like I said, the concept of self-inquiry itself is your object. So that's a subtle game the mind is playing. So in this way, you can catch the mind. To give you an example from a different context, somebody asked Bhagavan that, Bhagavan, when I practice self-inquiry, I just see the blank. Then Bhagavan says, who is it that's seeing the blank? Shift your attention to that, stay with that. So otherwise the mind tries to say, okay, I'm seeing a blank, what next? So it's the very fact that my mind is asking the question, what next, implies that there is a triputi, there is a involvement in the thoughts. So to again recapitulate my answer, just recognize that whenever this infinite regression happens, the mind is resisting resolving in its source, which is the Atma Tattvam, and forming a new concept with which it wants to juggle with or wrestle with, called self-inquiry, or called the method of who am I. And so that triputi, that thinker, thought, and thinking, the triputi is continuing there. Just become aware of that and refuse to get into more of that kind of ideation. Come back to just being as I. Be as you are, or Atma Samstam Manaha is the key word which you just keep coming back to that. Like I said, this is a tactical answer which I've given. Tactical means that's how you do in the heat of meditation. But then also back it up with your study, with your shravanam, with your mananam, with your nididhyasanam in other ways. Do study Bhagavan's works, do study a little bit of how the acharyas have taught the Upanishads. All of that works behind the screen, so that when you actually practice the self-inquiry, it will help the mind go deeper without getting stuck with this infinite regression problem. I hope I was able to clarify something about it.
Just one last thing, Raghavji.
Yeah.
So from your commentary, what I get is that infinite regression is essentially at the level of thoughts and mind.
Yes, correct.
So what I had inferred from that question was that it had something to do with I abidance. But I think what I am referring to actually then is Sphurana rather than infinite regression. Because there is this experience where the dwelling in the I becomes very intense. So I thought that this gentleman had referred to that I abidance becoming intense, and that being something like infinite regression. But now I get it. I think it is more to do with Sphurana that I relate to, rather than this level of thoughts.
Very good. Yeah, very good. So anyway, so this question is not exactly addressed to you, but still it kind of completes the discussion we had in the last week. So it is still, I think, germane. But just to build on what you just said, you are absolutely correct in that aspect. Namely, Aham Sphurana has no problem. Aham Sphurana is never referred to as infinite regression. Because it's not infinite, Aham Sphurana is where the mind has resolved as the self. So it is, like you said, just abidance in that. So it's not a problem or a challenge. It's actually the lakshyam. It is actually the desirable step in the whole Advaita sadhana, whereas infinite regression is like an obstacle to sadhana. So yeah, sure. Now you are clear about it. Sure. There was another question here. Anuragji, can you help me read that
out? Sure. So this is a question from YouTube by Neera Kashyapji, and I read, quote, during the churning, would paying attention to the thoughts and fears not strengthen these thoughts and fears? Unquote.
Yes. So that's a very important and valid question, which actually is to do with the next shloka, which perhaps we will look at. Not perhaps, we are going to look at that in the next session. But I'll give a brief answer for now. So these thoughts and fears, the question I just repeated, in any sadhana, let's say the main sadhana of Atma Vichara, when certain thoughts and fears and these emotional obstacles, the born of the churning of that very sadhana come up, should I look into the content of them and try to address them like proactively and constructively, or do I follow a more quote unquote a destructive kind of approach? Meaning I don't I disregard entirely these kind of things which come up as a result of the churning. So the first level answer I will give, but we will look into this further in the next shloka. The first level answer is, if you are able to entirely disregard them, be as you are, with Atma Samstam Manaha, nothing like that. That's the main thing. And which is why that's the actual solution, even because one part of us is, remember, giving energy to those very emotions. So those emotions do not have a total life independent of us. We ourselves are in some sense feeding energy to those obstacles, without knowing it, unwittingly, and then we have to deal with them. It's like I am feeding, let's say, a ferocious dog on the one hand, and then the dog is coming and attacking me. So in some sense, if I stop feeding the dog with food and with energy, in this case, the dog means these negative emotions, I will weaken them to a point where I can totally disregard them. So the first thing is, disregarding them is desirable. Definitely, if you are able to stay with your sadhana, disregarding them, like I said, just stay put where you are with the Upadesha, nothing like it. Very good. But sometimes these emotions or these obstacles which come up in churning are so powerful, they just demand some constructive, if you like, answers or redressal. And that is where the other method, which is mentioned as Viveka Vairagya in simple words. But these are so overused words. Sometimes they don't convey the depth of what is intended. So which is where you need to get into them to address them. Okay, that can happen, that can be necessary. But remember, the more we get into them and try to sort of inquire into what they're referring to, sometimes that becomes another samsara, another never-ending process. So which is why our masters have given us this dual approach. They call it Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tan Nirodha Yoga Sutra. Okay. So the Abhyasa there refers to just stay put, disregard these churning, whatever comes up. Okay. Stay put, be as you are. And the energy behind that will go away. Because if you don't give energy to these obstacles which are coming up, they will go away. Let's say if fear comes up, you don't resist it. Don't say, oh my God, the fear is coming. This shouldn't come. The fear is wrong. I should not be getting the fear. Don't get into that ideation. That will strengthen the fear. Instead, you just say, by the grace of Ishvara, I do my sadhana. This fear has come up unreasonably, amplifying, whatever was maybe in the back of my mind. You can even say, I welcome it. You do one pranam to that obstacle which comes up. You do a pranam mentally, namaha. I salute this fear and I stick to my sadhana. I don't need to look into it any further. Just give a salutation. That is the very correct attitude. You salute it because it is Ishvara's magic play going on. He's really messed with our whole, life in some sense, but he knows best. So you have that surrender. You have that surrender that, oh Lord, you are creating these, churning to come up. I rest at your feet. Okay, that's your attitude. In bhakti terms, it says, I rest at your feet, O Lord. Let whatever come, and let whatever go, go. But I remain a bhakta. That is the best attitude. The same thing I can say using the language of Atma Vichara. Be as you are. Remain rooted as Atma Tattvam. Be a sakshi to what comes and goes, disregarding the content of that. And you will be free of that, because the energy behind them gets dissipated. In their very coming out, they are losing their energy. So don't resist them, because the more you resist them, the more you feed them. And at the same time, don't also strengthen them consciously, saying, yes, those fears are very valid. Those emotions are very valid. You don't have to keep justifying, the energy behind that. That also validates, or that also increases that. So don't resist it. And at the same time, do not try to say, this is very correct. The mind is coming up with this. You don't have to even, sort of validate in that sense. You just say, this is part of the flow which is coming out and going. I allow them to go. Like a thorn which is in me, let them come, let them go. I don't resist either of them. That would be the best approach. Yeah.
Raghav, thank you so much. We do not have any more questions either from YouTube or from our Zoom participants.
Anuragji,
Hanji? Okay.
can I ask a question, please?
Please
a small
go ahead.
question.
Please.
Yeah. Hari Om, you were telling about the Mahashivratri Japa. If a person is depressed, Doing japa on Mahashivaratri, will it act as an antidepressant? Will it increase one's dopamine level?
Yes. So doing japa at certain times, like Mahashivaratri, will it have a wholesome effect on one's emotions, especially in coping with issues like being depressed or being sad? Yes, absolutely. So that's of course a large topic which I have dealt with at different points. But the speciality of Mahashivaratri is that any practice done during that time has a larger amplified effect. So this we take it on the basis both of trust, namely the Mahatmas who have told us this are totally compassionate and unselfish. They had no axe to grind, and they are telling us, look, whatever sadhanas you are doing, try and do at least a little bit during Mahashivaratri. Ideally, okay, stay awake all night long. Minimum, attend some of the pujas or chanting and stay with your own mantra japa. So we take it on that Shraddha of the Mahatmas that whatever sadhana you're doing has an amplified effect to whatever extent you're able to do during that night, maintaining jagaranam. Jagaranam is to stay awake, right? So that fact that you are able to resist the urge to sleep at some level, it's like empowering the deeper part of you, which will stand up and not give in to the negative emotions. So there's a subtle effect there that holds good for any kind of resistance which you put up towards your old habits. Okay, this feeling of sadness or depression, etc., is a kind of deep-rooted mental habit. As long as it's not totally clinical, which means you need a person needs some medicine, that's fine. In spite of that, there will be some residue left over that has to be dealt with only through psychological methods, which is meditation and so on. So after dealing with what you can at the clinical level, still whatever is left, definitely you can be not so helpless. Instead, you can proactively deal with it. This occasion like Shivaratri gives you that extra upsurge of energy. That was the thing, to deal with an issue like that powerful emotion needs some energy. The Ekadashi is another very significant junction point in the fortnight. Maybe I'll talk about it next time. So Ekadashi is when either a person can become a little irritable and angry and upset. If you notice your own, let's say, the emotional ebb and flow or of those around you, you will definitely see Ekadashi plus minus 1 day. Okay, Dashami, Ekadashi, Dwadashi. Those days, 10, 11, and 12 of any fortnight, you will find there is much greater proneness to emotional irritability and some, quarrels and things like that. At the same time, there is also an opportunity to really go deeper, which is why for all the Vaishnavas, Ekadashi is very important. Even so, the Masa Shivaratri and the Mahashivaratri are such opportunities for allowing the churning to happen. It happens without even your knowing it. It's like you're going before the mind, going deeper into the mind before your knowledge, and becoming free from this, urge for some kick, urge for some stimulation. So you're able to find that center of quietness within you, which is independent of this external stimulation. So that's the benefit of staying awake, and to whatever extent we can, we should benefit from that. So I think Anuragji, please take over. It's time for Akshara Manamalai. We will chant the Shanti Mantra and close today. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purna Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamiva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Thank you.
Raghavji, thank you so much. Your commentary about Mahashivratri was very insightful, and I learned a lot. I'm sure some of our devotees would have also gained enough and more understanding and knowledge. There is a comment about thanking you on YouTube from one of our devotees, Germana. She is mentioning you as an excellent teacher. Thank you. And now I would request Narayananji at the shrine to initiate Akshar Manamalai and Puja.
Thank you. Karuna Arunavani அருமக்ஷரமண திருநாழியத்தில் அழியார் திருமகள் தெரிய பரவுதல் பொருளாக கருணாகரமும் ரமணாரிய மூவ கையினால் சொல்லியது கதியாக அருணாச்சலமென அகமே அறிவோடு ஆழ்வார் சிவனொரு ஆழ்வாரே அருணாச்சலவனுக்கேற்ற சரவண பாலை சாற்ற அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலமென அகமென் நினைப்பவர் அகமெனே அருள்வார் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் அமிதமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகமுகுதீர்ப்பும் அகமுகை சிறையாய் அமர்ந்ததென்கொள் அருணாச்சலா ஆரும் காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி தினம் வழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்படி தப்புனை நினைத்தால் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈற்றிடும் அன்னை நெறிதரு புரிவோய் இதுவும் உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாகுலத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா ஊற்றுள்ளம் வீடாதுனை கண்டு அழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்திப்போர் என்னை களவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா தேதித்த உறக்கம் என்னை தீரழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கல்வன் அகத்தினில் புகுவோர் அகத்தில் இளையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவன் முன்னை பொழித்தேவர் வருவார் சூரே இரு அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஓங்கார பொருள் உயர்வில்லை உரையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா அவுப்பை போலேனக்கும் அருளை தட்டு எனை ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்கள் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமானை வாழி வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே ஏழுடந்த ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பமொந்தவே ஏழுடந்த ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பமொந்தவே இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே பாழ்மனம் மகந்தை வாழ்வு பாழ்பொழிகவே பாழ்மனம் மகந்தை வாழ்வு பாழ்பொழிகவே பரம சச்சிதானந்த ஆத்ம பாழ்பொழிகவே பரம சச்சிதானந்த ஆத்ம பாழ்பொழிகவே வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே தட்டிலாத நித்திய ஜீவ தத்ம போகவே தட்டிலாத நித்திய ஜீவ தத்ம போகவே தன்மயத்தை சின்மயத்தழைத்தி போகவே தன்மயத்தை சின்மயத்தழைத்தி போகவே எட்டு திக்கும் அம்ச சோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே எட்டு திக்கும் அம்ச சோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே எல்லா பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மையில் நிற்கவே எல்லா பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மையில் நிற்கவே வாழ்க சுயம் பிரகாசம் வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே அம்சசோகம் எல்லாம் அம்சசோகம் ओम भूर्भुवस्सुः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देव सविता प्रसव सत्यं गौरेण प्रसन्नामि अमृतं स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपानाय स्वाहा ज्ञानाय स्वाहा उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल श्री रत्नाय नमः नमो भगवती श्री अरुणाचल श्री रत्नाय नमः कात्याय मुद्राय वल्ली देवाय नमः सुब्रह्मण्याय स्वामिनाथाय नमः स्वामिनाथाय दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः दत्तात्रेय नमः भैरवाय नमः नरसिंहाय नमः शिव पार्वतीये नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः गोतीरं लड्डू नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आत्मनीयं समर्पयामि हरिओम मूर्तिबल समायुक्तं नागवल्ली तडिगुरुं कर्पूर्ण सूर्ण संयुक्तं प्रतिगुरुदां कर्पूर नीराजनं श्री रमण महर्षि समर्पयामि नमो भगवते श्री सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः ओम भगवते श्री स्वामिनाथाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री नरसिंहाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री भैरवाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री नंदीवैष्णवाय नमः ओम नमो भगवते श्री शिव पार्वतीये नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम नमः शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः ओम शिवाय नमः सोमो वा एतस्य राजमानस्य यो राजा तन्राज्यो वा सोमेन यजते देवस्वा वेदानि अविन्ति भवन्ति वेदावन्दो वै देवानां स्वाहा देवात्मैवान् प्रयच्छन्ति वैधनमुनस्तमन्ते राजाय देवदुराजा भवति न तत्र सूर्यो माधुर्यन्ततारकं देवानुष्ठुतवाचकुवाचति तवेवानि मन्मानि सर्वं सत्यवादं सर्वं नन्दुवादि कर्पूरजीराजनं श्रीरमणमहर्षित्यं कर्पूरस्नेनं कार्तिकाय गुरुरावलेयं कर्पूरज्ञानं श्रीपार्वतीत्यं समर्पयामि शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय यो वां पुष्पं वेदा पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति चन्द्रमा वां पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पशुमान् भवति ओम तद्ब्रह्मा ओम तद्वायु ओम तदात्मा ओम तत्सत्यम् ओम तत्सर्वम् ओम तत्पुरो नमः अंतर्गतभूते गुहाया विश्वं कुचितु तम यज्ञस्तं सत्कारं तम इंद्रस्तं रुद्रस्तं विष्णुस्तं ब्रह्मस्तं प्रजापति ओम तदापो ज्योतिर्गोमृतं गुरुपस्सरं न कर्मणा न प्रजया दने नित्यानेके अमृतत्वमानसु परेण नाहं नीतं गुहायं विप्राजते दत्यदियो विसन्ति वेदांत विज्ञान से निश्चलाता संन्यास योगातरे शुद्ध सत्पा ते ब्रह्मलोके तुम परांत काले परामृता परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे तारं विवामं परमेश्वभूतं यत् पुण्डरीकं गुणमत्य सदंसदं तत्रादित्यगणं कगनं विसोगस् तस्मिन् यदुपादित्यं यो वेदान्तौ स्मरप्रोक्तो वेदान्त सत्यं प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिः तस्य परसमहेश्वरः मन्त्रपुष्पं श्री रमण महर्षि किं मंत्रपुष्पं श्री कार्तिकाय मुरुगावटी देवालयं मंत्रपुष्पं श्री सुब्रह्मण्यं मंत्रपुष्पं स्वामी राधन मंत्रपुष्पं श्री दक्षिणामूर्ति मंत्रपुष्पं श्री नटराजन मंत्रपुष्पं श्री भैरवर मंत्रपुष्पं श्री नंदिमहेश्वर मंत्रपुष्पं श्री शिवपार्वतीक्यं समर्पयामि ओम तत्सर्वपार्वणमस्तु हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम यानि यानि सब पावानि प्रदक्षन्ति प्रदक्षिण नमो गणेशाय नमामि गजानन अभियान पद्मात्म गजानन मुक्तानाम एकदंतम उपास्ते ओम नमो भगवती श्री अनाथ ब्रह्मांड ओम नमो भगवती श्री अनाथ ब्रह्मांड ओम नमो भगवती श्री अनाथ ब्रह्मांड ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम शिवाय कोई बनाया प्रदीप भी बनाया था ऐसे ही अरे वो भगवान इसको दे दे तो जा रहा है लो
Namo Ramana. This Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's satsang with Raghav ji. You are all very welcome to join Mahashivratri celebrations at Raman Kendra, Delhi on 1st of March at 6 p.m. Namo Ramana. Thank you.